Trapped in a circus since he was a baby, a silverback gorilla leads an animal revolt to take all his companions back to the wild. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, The One and Only Ivan, from 2020. Inside the mall on the side of the highway, an entertainer called Mac has set up a tent, and every day he puts on a circus show with his animals. Although the audience enjoys all the shows, the main attraction is Ivan, a silverback gorilla who pretends to be angry in front of the crowd in order to impress them. After the performance, Ivan is always visited by Julia, the daughter of one of the circus employees called George, who is responsible for feeding the animals and looking after the lighting. Despite being able to be close to any creature, Julia always spends her afternoons sitting next to the gorilla's cage drawing pictures for him. After painting another one of her pictures, Julia is visited by Mac, who congratulates her on her drawing and gives her some money so she can buy new crayons. After the girl leaves, George tells Mac that the vacations are coming up and that traffic will improve. Despite agreeing in front of his employee, the circus owner is sad when he is alone with Ivan and laments the fact that the last day's sales weren't even enough to pay the rent. About to close the doors, Mac says they should think of a way to regain the public's attention, and Ivan spends a long time thinking about how he can do it. At night, the gorilla is watching the moon with the elephant Estella and a little street dog who has been sleeping in his cage since he was a baby. After a long conversation with his friends, Ivan says that it's his fault the circus isn't attracting more audiences and decides that he's going to fix his performance, showing all his ferocity to the audience. The next day, the show goes ahead as usual and Ivan shows off his wild side, but despite his best efforts, the audience doesn't seem very impressed. After the performance, Ivan is in his cage when Julia arrives excitedly and gives him her old crayon kit as a present, as well as some sheets of paper for him to draw on. Alone with his present, the gorilla starts sniffing the crayon when the dog shows up to talk about it. In his office, Mac finishes feeding his baby Snickers and goes downstairs to leave when he sees the intruding dog, furious that Costello hasn't gotten him out yet. Afraid of being fired, the employee says he'll take care of the dog and takes the key from the cage to get him out, but as soon as he unlocks the door, Ivan sits down in the middle of the path and prevents the human from entering. Later, Ivan picks up the crayon and begins sketching his first artwork, drawing a beetle inside its cage. The next day, Ivan puts on his show and tries his best to look scarier, but despite his best efforts, the audience isn't very impressed and soon leaves. After the performance, Mac receives a call from another circus owner who has gone bankrupt, offering a new animal. Excited, Circus Walter White accepts, thinking that this is what they need to win back the public's attention. Unaware of Mac's plans, Ivan talks to the dog when Julia shows up to show another of her drawings, this time of the street dog she decides to name Bob. When he approaches to see the girl's painting, the dog accidentally turns over the sheet of paper and Julia sees the drawing Ivan has made, and is impressed by his skills. Excited, the girl calls her father, who thinks that is just doodles, but Julia manages to recognize the beetle, which makes the gorilla very happy. The next day, Mac wakes up early in the morning and goes out to organize the last things before receiving the new animal. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Bob goes to Mac's office and starts rolling around on Snicker's bed, as well as eating the dog's food. While he's eating, Bob talks to the poodle, who tells him that today's show has been cancelled due to the arrival of a new animal. Eager to tell everyone the news, Bob leaves the office and shouts to everyone that the show has been cancelled, which gets the other animals excited. As soon as he finishes telling them the news, the truck arrives with the new creature that refuses to leave on its own, pushing Mac away. After being knocked down, the circus owner says he'll need help and picks Stella up from her cage, taking her to the container where he has an elephant calf. Using her trunk, Stella guides little Ruby to Ivan and Mac introduces her to his new colleagues, saying that she's just what they need to revive the show. Jealous, the gorilla lies down to sleep when Ruby starts talking to him and asking for Ivan's stuffed toy. Still feeling short-changed, the gorilla does his best to end the conversation, but the little elephant likes to talk and asks him to tell a story, only stopping when Ivan talks about how scary he can be during his show. The next day there's another performance and the gorilla does his best to scare the humans, but before he can finish, Mac closes his curtain and says it's time for the audience to meet the circus's new flagship, Little Ruby. As this is her first performance, the baby goes up with Stella, who helps her during the show, making everyone think that they are mother and daughter. Because of this, the audience finds everything even cuter and applauds the performance like never before, greatly increasing the circus's popularity. To attract even more attention, Mac puts a picture of Ruby on top of Ivan's poster and the gorilla feels even more left out. After another performance, Julia goes up to Ruby and congratulates her on her performance. While talking to her, the girl realizes that Stella isn't putting her paw on the ground and tells her father, who tells Mac. Concerned, the circus owner examines the elephant's paw in an attempt to find a wound and finds nothing, which makes him suspect an infection and call the vet. While waiting to be seen, Stella decides to tell Ruby a story about the time when she was still free and lived peacefully on the savannah, which makes the little elephant excited about the idea of returning to the wild one day. The next day, Stella's leg is still injured and she can't perform, leaving Ruby to go on stage alone. When it's time for the performance, the baby becomes afraid and doesn't show up when Mac calls, forcing Ivan to put his resentment aside in order to motivate her. More relaxed, Ruby goes to the center alone and performs her show, to the applause of the entire audience. During the night, Ivan notices that the baby can't sleep due to hunger and decides to draw her a carrot, handing the paper over to Ruby to spend the night. While holding the paper, the elephant asks Ivan to tell a story and he decides to talk about his childhood, when he lived happily with Mac and his wife. Because he was a baby, the little gorilla could go everywhere and became a great attraction for the public, which gave Mac the idea of using little Ivan to get some money from photos. As he grew older, the gorilla became more and more troublesome and destroyed part of the human's house, which upset Mac's wife so much that she left and never came back. With his wife gone, Mac decided to open a circus and has kept Ivan in his cage ever since, buying the other animals to perform in his show. Listening to the story, Ruby falls asleep and sleeps next to the gorilla's cage. Just as he's about to go to bed, Ivan is called by Stella, who warns him that she won't live much longer. Before leaving, the elephant makes the gorilla promise to take care of Ruby and says she wants her to have a life in the wild, living free away from cages. As soon as he hears Stella's request, Ivan gives his word that Ruby will have a different life and says goodbye to his friend, who then leaves for animal paradise. After Stella leaves, everyone in the circus is very sad and Mac goes to talk to Ruby to calm her down, starting her training soon after. Watching from afar, Julia realizes that the elephant is tired and asks Mac to stop, but the man refuses and continues to force Ruby. From inside his cage, Ivan watches everything and decides to intervene, grumbling to Mac to leave the little elephant alone. Despite the gorilla's complaints, Mac doesn't care and it's Ruby who makes him stop, spitting water from her trunk right into the man's face and revealing his true identity as Heisenberg. Wet and hairless, Mac finally stops and Ivan begins to draw the key to the cage, hoping that Julia will recognize the painting and release them so that they can go to the forest on the other side of the highway. The next morning, Julia arrives early and greets all the animals. As soon as the girl approaches his cage, Ivan hands her the paper, but before she can recognize it, Mac appears and asks to see the drawings. When he learns that it was Ivan who did it, the man realizes how much this can attract the public and announces on TV that his gorilla can draw, multiplying the crowd and making Ivan the main attraction again. Despite this, the primate doesn't seem very happy and keeps watching Ruby play. When it's time to perform, Ivan takes a chalk and stares at the crowd, but despite the pressure from the presenter, the animal doesn't make a single scribble and returns to his cage in the middle of the show, leaving everyone in the circus disappointed, including Mac. After the presentation, the man goes to the cage to talk to Ivan and realizes that Bob is still there. Furious, the man calls Costello and says he'll fire him if he doesn't get the dog out of there. While the human prepares a net to capture him, Bob talks to Ivan and discovers that he has a plan to get them out of there. Following the gorilla's orders, the dog goes up to Costello and bites him right on the back, luring the human into Ivan's cage, who pretends to be asleep. After Costello enters his territory, the gorilla jumps in front of the employee who faints as soon as he sees him. With the way clear, Ivan frees Ruby and the other animals and they head for the locked exit. Using his gigantic strength, the gorilla breaks down the door and everyone leaves the mall for the first time in their lives. Outside, Bob says he knows the way to the forest and everyone starts following him to the highway. While his animals are on the run, Mac receives a call from Costello who tells him that he is inside the animal's cage. Confused, Mac asks what happened and the employee tells him that the animals are missing, which makes the owner leave the house in despair. At the mall, the troupe reaches the edge of the highway and begins to cross, but Murphy the rabbit's truck ends up stuck on the curb between the two lanes of the road. With a car coming exactly towards the rabbit, Ivan runs back along the highway and manages to save him at the last second before he is crushed. On the other side of the highway, the animals run towards the jungle in high spirits, but just as they are beginning to taste freedom, they realize that this forest is just a small reserve in the middle of the city. While they think about what to do, Mac arrives at the mall and starts walking towards the forest. Seeing the light of the lantern, Ivan asks everyone to hide in the bushes and tries to scare Mac away, but the human manages to calm him down and takes everyone back to the mall, which makes the gorilla feel as if he has failed in his mission. Wanting to know what the forest is like, Ruby asks Ivan to tell her about his life before he met Mac and the gorilla says he can't remember. With a little insistence, the primate finally gives in and tells her about how he used to break away from his gang to draw in the mud on the rocks. Together with his parents and sister, Ivan spent his days playing with the rest of his gang, but that was only until the day the humans entered the forest in search of animals. To escape, Ivan's father put the baby on his back and ran through the jungle until he found a very tall tree. There, the male with the silverback put little Ivan on top and went to face the humans to protect his family, but even though he was extremely strong, he couldn't do anything against the firearms. After that day, Ivan never saw anyone of his kind again and has only his gorilla plush to remember his gang by. At the end of the story, Ivan regrets not having been able to help defend his family, and it is Ruby who has to console him, saying that his father loved him just the way he was. After the conversation, the little elephant goes to bed and continues her training with Mac the next morning. While watching Ruby, Ivan is visited by Julia, who shows up with a present, a kit of finger paints she received from her aunt. When the gorilla approaches, Julia says she's heard what happened and asks if he doesn't want to stay there anymore. Although she can't help him, the girl says that's why she started drawing and that she's free to be wherever she wants through her imagination. Finally, Julia says that Ivan is an artist and that he can do the same, which makes the gorilla very thoughtful. Playing with water, Ivan remembers how he used to play with mud when he was little and decides to use the paint he received from Julia, opening all the jars and starting a drawing on the wall of the stage where he usually performs. Outside the circus, a reporter goes to talk to Mac and tells him that people have claimed to have seen animals on the highway, including a gorilla. Knowing that such a report would be a scandal, the man ducks the reporter's accusations and assures her that all the animals are inside, inviting her to film the show. After the conversation with the woman, Mac goes to George and tells him about the journalist's presence, saying that the circus could close if people found out and asking Julia's father to keep it a secret. With that done, Mac starts the show and introduces each of his animals, but when it's Ivan's turn, the gorilla doesn't move and continues painting the landscape of his old home on the canvas. When he sees the work of art, the crowd applauds and thinks it's incredible, but Julia knows that he drew it because it's where he wanted to be and runs off to talk to her father. When he sees his daughter, George congratulates her on having given Ivan the paints, and the girl says that it doesn't matter, because the gorilla painted it because that's where he wanted to be. The girl then says that they should help him and suggests talking to the reporter, and even though it's his job, George allows her to go and talk to the woman. Excited, Julia runs up to the journalist and tells her everything she knows, causing the news to circulate and a large crowd to gather around the mall calling for the animals' freedom. Seeing the crowd, Ruby asks if they've done anything to make the humans angry, and Ivan replies that on the contrary, now people want to help them win their freedom. Because of popular pressure, Mac decides to end his performances and donate all his animals to the zoo. When the biologists arrive to do the collection, Ruby gets nervous, asking how to make the others like her, and Ivan tells her a few jokes to help her get along. Excited at the idea of meeting more animals of her species, Ruby says she's going to tell everyone about her life in the circus and walks excitedly over to one of the biologists. After everyone has left, Ivan says goodbye to Bob and gives him his stuffed gorilla as a souvenir. When the dog is about to leave, Mac appears and Bob tries to run away in desperation, but now the man doesn't care anymore and asks him to relax, letting the dog leave in peace. Alone with the gorilla, Mac says it was all great fun and shows a photo of the day he took him home, saying it was the best time of his life. Overcome with emotion, Ivan approaches his human companion and puts his head against his, making Mac cry. After the gorilla leaves, the former circus owner wishes him good luck and goes to the exit, where he says he'll miss him. After saying goodbye, Mac goes away and leaves the door open, allowing the biologists to approach to rescue him. With his mission complete, Ivan gets into the zoo's transport box and blacks out, waking up some time later in a white room. As he doesn't recognize the place, Ivan feels afraid and starts to attack the door, but the biologist manages to calm him down and tells him that this won't be his new home, opening the door so that he can have access to nature. Happy, the gorilla stops at the entrance to feel the grass for the first time in a long time. In addition, he keeps sniffing the flowers around him until he meets other adult gorillas and babies. While watching the others of his kind, Ivan hears the sounds of elephants nearby and runs to the top of a tree to watch, seeing Ruby playing at the water's edge with the others of her kind. Feeling that his mission has been completed, Ivan tells Stella that Ruby has finally gotten to know nature and that his promise has been fulfilled, watching from afar as the elephant walks away with the rest of her group. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.